And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you in advance for your attention and participation. I ask that you excuse me for reading the material. It's in your best interest, because if I don't, it's an hour-and-a-half presentation. I claim that a sustainable supply chain is a supply chain that learns. Learning entails managing the inevitable conflict between invention and innovation. And that must be done throughout the whole chain of all relationships. Accordingly, supply chain managers must have the knowledge and skill to facilitate supply chain evolution and to do so at the speed of opportunity. I will suggest one way of doing this today. Ideally, this will prompt you to either apply it or, better yet, find a better way. In my perspective, a supply chain consists of a pull function and one or more participants, each pursuing their respective return on their investment for participating in that chain. A chain enables a two-way flow. Commitments flow down the chain, and responses flow up the chain. Each link has the competencies and resources to make their commitments to their suppliers and responses to its customer at the target ROI. Each such community of purposeful practice is X parties wide, as illustrated by ROI sub A, sub A1, sub AN, and Y linkage is deep, as illustrated by ROI-A and ROI-D. In a typical large-scale company, there are approximately 40 suppliers in the first tier, and each one of those suppliers has a supply chain of 7 or 8 download links. So it gets to be a pretty large and complex device. There are finite limits regarding the extent and variety of links in a chain. Most of the companies today have far too wide and far too deep supply chains. The pull starts when a customer says they want something. You are here, in one way to think of it. Many people presume that you're here, but in fact, you're really here because it's your customer's customer that you're trying to satisfy, which means you have to satisfy the customer, which means you have to be the right kind of thing going on here, which means you have to have good first-tier suppliers, etc. Okay? And I should have noted that each line in this diagram represents packaging and logistics, which are typically loss functions, not profit functions. The commitment chain serves the makers, while the response chain serves the sources of reward. Inevitably, things change. Ideas, resources, etc., all change randomly. No supply chain ever repeats any process. Within this situation, we can appreciate the distinction of invention versus innovation. If we go back a little ways to Latin, we find that vent means, in invention, means to bring out something that was already known, while nova means to put in, to change something. Jeff Nicholson's characterization of the two ideas clearly describes the opportunity. These two clearly opposing ideas are the roots of conflict in any two links in a chain. The idea here in a design chain is to increase the velocity of innovation, the velocity of learning by the people in the chain. So invention has negative effects. Typically, a conflict arises because an invention delights one link in the chain, while the consequent changes in that link threaten the ROI of its constituents. Innovation is the problem. Each change will have a positive or negative effect on the overall transfer function, either from incorporation of the change or from imprudent ignoring the change, or worse, from some links responding to the opportunity while other links ignore or actively resist the opportunity, so the overall incoherence of the chain becomes worse. Well, in the real world, invention happens. But innovation may or may not happen based on whether or not you can rebalance the ROI of every one of the links in the chain simultaneously and quickly. And you can't. If you presume that you are going to go do that, you can never get it done. So you have to construct a chain that will synergistically, simultaneously react among the links to rebalance themselves. Innovation may or may not happen unless the respective ROIs can be rebalanced. It's no simple matter, and it entails the classic Newtonian challenge of rebalancing mass, momentum, and energy of the content of affected links, the coherence of link interoperation, and the cycle time of each link. Which says that supply chain managers do not get to enjoy repetitive commerce among the links. They are challenged to achieve a thing called dynamic stability of the chain as innovation occurs. This means that making sure that the changes are orchestrated in such a way that the commitment response dance continues and is ever improving. The challenge of achieving dynamic stability is illustrated here as the relationship between maneuverability on the one hand, yet stability or predictability on the other hand. Upper left is minimal maneuverability. Minimal maneuverability and maximum stability as typified by an anvil, which is going to be an anvil tomorrow, or Brownian motion. Most people don't be fooled by Brownian motion. Yes, it's somewhat unpredictable, but you come back tomorrow and it's going to be exactly the same unpredictable. Okay? Just because everything is continually changing does not mean increased maneuverability. It simply means that you will come back and find the same mess. At the maximum maneuverability and minimum stability, I learned at a young age never to ride a vehicle that was unstable at rest. Other examples are shown here. Key to this session are the distinction of a rules-driven enterprise versus a goal-seeking enterprise versus a co-evolving enterprise. In between here we have anarchy and things called teenagers, which are a little bit stable and maneuverable, and helicopters and hummingbirds, which were said to never fly except they do. But our real objective here is to look at the enterprise called the supply chain and determine whether it's going to be run by a set of rules that are negotiated among the links, or a set of goals that the links simultaneously pursue, or a co-evolving community of purposeful practice that the real links do. The more successful supply chains are those that are co-evolving by continuously learning. I cannot cite any in industry, but in the design world, in design supply chains, we are beginning to see instances of groups of human beings who mutually adapt to one another's ideas, cheerfully dropping their own pet calves and doing things a new way. Well, how do you make this happen? Some very simple rules have been around, or observations been around for a number of years. On the left-hand side is a set of situations that may prevail in your supply chain. That says a lack of mission and vision, a lack of strategy, a lack of intent, goals, etc., result in a set of behaviors that are going to happen. So, in fact, these line up pretty well. A lack of mission and vision will result in the ambiguity among the participants in the supply chain. A lack of strategy, disorientation. They'll all be heading in different directions. A lack of intent is ambivalence. Why should we worry? We're not trying to do anything. A lack of goals is alienation. Oh, I don't belong in this team. A lack of plans is dissonance, etc. So tip number one, if you're going to manage a learning supply chain, is that you must pay very careful attention to making sure that everybody's evolving this set of knowledge throughout their links. Because if you don't, you'll find these things happening. And if you walk into most any corporation today, in most any country in the world, you will find an ethos right down in this dimension, which says that we're all operating at less than 15% efficiency of the usage of resources. We are the problem, right? Well, if that's not bad enough, the real problem is it's a web out there. There's no such thing as a simple supply chain because there's another pull going on simultaneously. And if this is your customer's customer, this is your customer, here you are, and yes, by the way, here's another customer that wants something different than that customer. So you now have this thing, I could make it a full sheet of little bubbles of all interconnected web. So you have multiple objectives that you have to try and optimize for. And once again, you can't do that, but hopefully you can educate your supply chain to where it will do that cooperatively. So, what's the real story? Is there too much innovation in the world, or not enough of this thing called agility? I think it's summarized quite well here by Francis Ford Coppola, a well-known Hollywood movie producer. The secret of making a good movie is getting everyone to make the same movie. And the making of a movie is a simultaneous design supply chain. And then Wayne Gretzky put it very simply, if you're going to have a continuously competitive supply chain, you have to skate to where the puck's going to be. It's not a matter of the members of the supply chain worrying about where they are today and what their ROI was as of their actions yesterday. They need to be thinking ahead about where we're all going to be tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. In many design supply chains, the forward-looking horizon must be somewhere around 15 years, even though the technology half-lives that they have to master and harness are in the order of 1.5 years. An idea worth investigating in this regard is a notion called chaotic organizations, where the chain has a purpose, a clear, coherent statement, and the members are committed to that purpose, and then it has a set of principles that puts authority at the edges and alignment at the centers, and that size matters. And you see, cleaning your design engine can't be done with chemicals. When you're cleaning a design chain, you must do it with reflection and after-action reviews and strategic thinking. Pardon me?
Are we supposed to be on a different slide? Oh, I thought we were supposed to be on a different slide. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Did you mean to advance the slides?
No?
Okay.
Should I?
Every other time you brought up a new term, you had a different slide.
Yeah.
Or to bring up a different term. Sorry.
Well,
Go back to reading.
the purpose of this slide, of course, is agility, which says you got to get in the future and everybody together. All right. And how can you do that when things are so complicated? And the answer, turned out, was invented years ago. It's called managing by model. Here's a simple example that's some 40 years old, as a matter of fact. Catalytic cracker at Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, runs all day long at around 2,000 psi. It's controlled by 773 control loops that are embedded in this computer down here in the form of 2,500 equations, which are resolved about every 2 minutes. And this computer runs those control loops, which determines how much gasoline, kerosene, you get, and it can change its mind every 5 minutes or so. And it runs this whole show at about 2,000 psi, plus or minus 3 psi. If you go beyond that, boom. Right? So now when you look at the design supply chain, what should your model be of the design supply chain? You have to look at all the links, and you have to mutually understand what your linkages are with each other, your coefficients of binding with each other, and get that model into a simulatable picture where everyone can understand their role and their malfunction modes. And it works reasonably well. GE has been edging into this for a number of years. Here's one way it has happened is that you start with your current enterprise, and you have a new invention comes along, so you envision the future enterprise and ask a bunch of modelers to determine what changes would be necessary to the model of the enterprise to create a model of the envisioned enterprise. Well, they have some knowledge assets over here that they can use, and they proceed then to devise a new envisioned enterprise, and they start with providing for the enterprise learning. And then what kind of culture, the way things are done around here, will be necessary for that future enterprise. Then what spectrums of innovation and information and decision must that new enterprise be able to occur? And then what kind of financial equations will be necessary? And finally, what's the physical makeup of the enterprise? And in most all textbooks today, people start down here and kind of wander up a ways and then give up. Out of that, you see, you can then prepare the automation that will be useful in this future enterprise. And more importantly, you can prepare the staff, the new kinds of designers that are going to be needed for designing things of the future. And you bring that all together, and voila, your new enterprise is there. And that may happen daily. And oh, by the way, if you think lack of resources is a problem, you're about to experience too many resources called cyber interruptions. And I don't mean just the hackers from the bad guys. They only cause about 20% of the problems in our current systems. 80% are caused by confused adults inside the system doing the wrong things, or as 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor meltdown illustrated, 3 different people did exactly, respectively, the right thing, except in the wrong order. And the software in that reactor was not designed to detect improper sequences of human interaction, which was a fundamental design problem, and it still exists today. I have yet to find a textbook, a national standard, etc., for designing systems that require that the software check each input to determine whether or not it is the appropriate time to honor that input. So you've got to now deal with this, because the larger your supply chains get, the more complex they become, and the more human errors occur. So one way to give yourself a little scorecard in your team is simply ask yourself and each other whether or not, or how well you score on each of these factors. Because the winners always get better at fundamentals. They learn the plays with each other and their teammates' habits, and then they do their personal best. And then they encourage and admonishing all the other people. And they learn from their encouragement. And they hate to lose. And they set not just today's goals, but how fast must we improve goals. Not how did we do last week. How fast must we improve next week. And they honor then results more than position in the higher organizational hierarchy, and even more than pay. And misery's optional. How about a business scorecard that shows not only the wake of where you have been, but the icebergs out ahead of you? Thank you.
How would we take Jack's idea of turning this into a loop and apply it here? Could we take those poles of yours and turn them and attach them back to the ends of those ROI chains somehow?
That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that inside of each one of those bubbles is that loop. Each bubble, each link in the supply chain must be a cooperative learning enterprise, so that there's learning happening in every chain simultaneously. And then another a loop above that, which says you reject the learning that's not going to be in the best interest of the whole system. Right? You cannot manage that from a hierarchical management position. Every member of the community must be dedicated to every other member of the community, or you lose. Okay?
Jack, what about if you are in a value chain or in a connectivity with other companies that
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
What if you are in a connectivity with other companies that are not willing to learn?
Well, why would you do that?
Sometimes you have no choice.
I mean, it was your choice. Now, you can either abandon them, or why don't we help them understand what the ramifications are of not willing to learn? It is rare that you meet a human being that does not enjoy learning.
Well, so an example.
That thing called an aha that we talk about, in fact, the brain executes a polypeptide called enkephalins that is the strongest chemical beyond heroin. I have yet to meet somebody who didn't like to learn. I have met a lot of people who are afraid of the future. But once they know that there's people on either side of them, then they open up. Otherwise, you've got to just change the chain. You've got to take that link out and find another one, right?
Any other questions? Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.